Hello and a very warm welcome to Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And my guest today is a legend, an institution, a man who's worth a big fat chapter in the history of German television. And here he is, Armin Maiwald. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. For me, it's I'm very excited to have you here today, I can say that, yeah? Now, Armin Maiwald was one of the creators of the longest-running and most popular children's programme on German TV. It's called Die Sendung mit der Maus, quite literally, the programme with the mouse. And it's been going strong for 4 decades, and Armin Maiwald is still creating the award-winning films that are one of the cornerstones of the show's success. Now, there will be few, if any, Germans under the age of, say, 50 who haven't had at least one key aspect of the world explained to them with great humour and great imagination by Armin Maiwald. And I think we can very much look forward to hearing what he has to say about the following topics. Show and tell. Armin Maiwald is a master at turning the very ordinary, everyday things in our lives into absolutely compelling television. Traumatic times. Many Germans who were children during the Second World War are still tormented by memories of those terrible years, including our studio guest. And the kids are all right. Find out how a change in German law means that it's no longer possible to go to court against the noise that children make. Armin Maiwald, thank you very much for joining us once again. Now, your show, Die Sendung mit der Maus, the programme with the mouse, in Germany, it's something that nearly everybody has grown up with. But when you're outside Germany, when you bump into people who don't know the programme, what do you tell them about it? How do you describe it?
I'd describe it as a magazine show, a mix of clips that are amusing and films that are informative. The funny bits are animated cartoons, and the short films explain aspects of everyday life. For example, how do you make a pencil? How do they put those stripes into toothpaste? Or how does a nuclear power plant work? Why is petroleum so important? Lots of other things.
When you're explaining things to people, when you're actually you're teaching things to children on television, it sounds very serious, and it sounds a little bit, to use an intellectual word, it sounds a little bit didactic. Yeah, that's very unfashionable. People always say didactic is bad, but you do it and you get away with it. How come?
We didn't want the show to be based on didactic principles. I keep saying over and over that we don't teach because there's something systematic about teaching and learning. If a teacher tells the class how to translate a word from German into English, you can bet that the next day, provided that at least some of the kids were awake, at least one of them is going to remember what the teacher said. But we can't assume that all kids are familiar with our show. We have to start from square one every time. We base the program on principles of dramatic construction and journalism, but not on a specific curriculum or a set of learning targets. So we always try to tell a story that has elements of journalism and good storytelling. And if afterward the people who've seen it are a little smarter, if they've learned something, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not a lesson, and we can't assume that someone watches our program on a regular basis. Someone who tunes in for the first time has to be able to enjoy it as much as the regular viewers do. Each show has to stand for itself.
Let's just clarify once again for our viewers. As you've already explained, there are 2 sides to the programme. There's the lighter side, which has the cartoons and the mouse joking about with the little blue elephant and that kind of thing. Then there's the more serious side, where you and your colleagues explain the world, as it were, yeah? How do you choose your topics?
Most of the ideas come from kids who've written to us. Every week we get between 1,000 and 2,000 letters, cards, or emails.
Each week?
Each week, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. We sort through them at the office. A lot of the questions are the same. Why is the sky blue? Or why can you see through water? We've been getting these kinds of questions for years. But these days we get a lot of new questions. Questions kids didn't ask 20 or 30 years ago because they relate to things that simply didn't exist back then.
For example?
For example, wie funktioniert How does the internet work? How does my mobile phone know that I'm standing out in front of the Cologne Cathedral? What effect does vitamin C have on people? When I take an aspirin for a headache, how does it get from my stomach to my head? Grown-ups would be too embarrassed to ask questions like that. Those are typical questions that kids ask. And sometimes the questions are so devastatingly simple that you wonder why no one's asked them before. And so we try to figure out how best to present an explanation. And since I'm not a doctor or a technician or an engineer, I have to start by doing research. That's the first difficult task. Sometimes it takes a very long time to find the right experts. I just did a piece on a research laboratory that was built 1,800 meters underground, but they're doing research on outer space. It's a complex subject and difficult to understand. The second difficult task is to actually put the story together. We have to take these complex subjects and create a story that's easy to understand and also fits the time limits of our format.
And when you talk about you talk about small kids, about preschool kids, we saw in one of your programs you actually you tackled the most difficult issue of all, the most difficult question of all, which is death. What was that like?
We did two different stories. One involved a young girl named Katarina. She died on exactly the same day as our 25th anniversary broadcast. Her grandmother wrote to us and told us about her, some of her fond memories, and also some of the sad ones. So we talked about it in a production meeting. Isn't there some way that we could do a show about this girl? Who was she? How did she die? It was clear that it was going to be difficult for me to do a story about someone, A, whom I had never met, and B, someone who died. There wasn't much to go on, except for a few photos. But afterward, we ended up getting a huge amount of mail from viewers. And then we started thinking about, well, what really happens when someone dies? How do families deal with it? How do people deal with it? Of course, you can't just drop in on a family and say, your grandfather's just died. Can we do a story about the bereavement and the funeral? So we had to do something fictional. And then our next question was, who's going to die in this story? A grandfather? That wouldn't work because all the kids would run to their granddad and say, are you going to die now? And we certainly couldn't do it about parents or friends from school. So what we did was to create a twin brother for me. I really didn't have one, of course. So he was the one who died, and I was the one who told the story. That's how we dealt with it. It was a good idea, and it worked. I gave the funeral address at my fictional brother's funeral.
Give me a very quick answer. Are your programs designed for children or for children and adults?
Both. Back then, we wanted to create something that would be good for kids and interesting for the adults. We didn't know whether it was going to work, but it turned out that it did. A lot of parents watched the show with their kids.
Now, something a little bit different. The Nazi years here in Germany were a terrible time around many parts of Europe and the rest of the world too. The period between 1939 and 1945, the Second World War, was the culmination of that awful era. And what we're still seeing today is that the trauma that many people have got as a result of their memories from that time applies to our guest, Armin Maiwald, and to many people who were children at that time. They're still struggling to come to terms with all that they experienced.
Dol Schmidt-Holstein was 7 years old when she lost her father. He died in 1942 during the war. In post-war Germany, 1/4 of all children grew up without a father, but they were left with many traumatic memories.
I was terribly afraid. It was the worst fear I'd ever felt in my life.
Experts like Hartmut Radebold say up to 12% of those who were children during the war still suffer from trauma today. After the war, focus was placed on rebuilding a life and returning to normalcy. But with age, suppressed memories can resurface, and that can lead to conflict between the generations.
In 80% of families, no one spoke of the past. It wasn't talked about at all. And in 20%, the children were constantly bombarded with their parents' fears and anxieties and tried to get away from it.
Dol Schmidt-Holstein is writing a memoir to overcome the trauma. but many others are still trapped by memories of the past.
Memories of a different kind this time, Armin Maiwald. When you see a report like that, yeah, what do you think?
Well, I grew up during that time. We were bombed out of our house 3 times in Cologne. Then we moved to Silesia. Then we had to escape the Russians. I was in Dresden on February 13th, 1945, during that terrible bombing attack. We got out of there on the last train and ended up in Bavaria. My father was killed in Freising during the last days of the war. But these catastrophes were normal for us children at the time.
It was normal.
Yeah.
One of the most remarkable days of my life was April 8th, 1945, the day of the German surrender. And suddenly it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. No more bombs falling, no more anti-aircraft guns, no warplanes in the sky. It was so quiet it was scary. It took a while to get used to it. And then the first American tanks arrived, and we thought things would get back to normal. More tanks arrived. We played in the rubble, and we didn't have enough to eat. But all that was normal back then. During the war, we had to jump out of bed at 11 p.m. and run down to the air raid shelter. That's just the way things were. To this day, I still keep some clothes piled up on the side of my bed. I learned to do that as a kid. Grab what you can and head down to the shelter.
You still have a bag next to your bed?
No, not anymore. You just grabbed your clothes, no suitcase or anything. My mother would pick up my little sister and carry her down to the shelter. I was 2 years old in 42, and I had to look after myself. I had a little suitcase and some clothes. I don't have a suitcase anymore, but those are things you'd never forget.
Das sind so Sachen, die bleiben einem irgendwann.
These are things that they don't just stay in your mind. They perhaps become more and more intensive with the passing of time. Is that something we often hear? Is that what has happened with you?
Sometimes, particularly when I'm making a film about the post-war period, for example, it can happen, and I'm confronted with these memories once again. But most of the time, they've been consigned to the veil of forgetfulness.
But that was a painful thing for you to do, wasn't it? That was a difficult... Because I have a quote from you. When you finished making those films, which are pretty remarkable films, you said, "I never want to see those films again."
Yeah.
You put them back in, you opened the drawer and put them back in, didn't you?
Yes. And let me explain. Despite all the archive material that we'd used, I thought I'd produced something that had conveyed the facts, but not any feeling. Nothing about the absolute horror and the poverty that people experienced back then. But later, one of our new film editors managed to convince me that it really was a good story. And I got to the point where I could accept that. And I made my peace with it over time.
But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because even people of my age, my generation, as it were, and then, young children, they have no idea what you went through. They can have no... It's a great thing that they have no idea, but they can't understand.
There's been peace in Europe for 60 years now. And if that were the only thing that Europe had achieved, that would be good enough for me. I'm glad that today's children have not had to experience what war was like. Still, I think that from time to time it's a good idea to show reports on TV that portray how very different life is elsewhere. Every day we see reports on TV about wars in various places around the world and people starving and living in poverty. It's taking place quite far away, and it's foreign to us. But when you're talking about your own experience, it takes on a certain authenticity, so it has a greater effect on people. I showed this film once in a theater, and I thought, this isn't working at all. There were 400 or 500 kids there, and they didn't make a sound. The organizers asked me to stay around afterward and answer a few questions from the audience, for 10 minutes maybe. As it turned out, the kids had paid close attention, and they spent 90 minutes asking questions, including follow-ups about specific details. So I had to admit to myself that the film really did have an effect on them, although I could no longer bear to watch it myself. It was an amazing experience, and I realized that it really had done something for the kids who watched it.
Das hat auch für die Kinder, die dazugeschaut haben, hat's irgendwas gebracht.
Well, good for you, Armin Maiwald. That's all I can say to that. Now, we're talking here about Germany. We're talking about German children. And one question you hear very, very often here in Germany, is Germany a child-friendly society? No, say many. Yes, says I. However, there are apparently a lot of people who file official complaints, who even go to court about the noise that children make, especially when they play together at daycare centres. Now, there's a new law out, though, that's going to make it more difficult for them to do so.
They can be loud at times, even too loud. This childcare centre in Berlin was forced to move after being sued for noise pollution. But there won't be many cases like that in the future.
I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I'm happy about the law since it will help childcare centers. But I'm sad that it came to this, that a law was required to grant children the right to make noise.
In May of this year, the German parliament ruled unanimously that the sound of playing children is no longer classifiable as noise pollution, equivalent to traffic or construction noise.
We must permit children to be children and respect, like, love and welcome them as such, and our laws must support that.
Germans are being encouraged to have more children, and for that, daycare is needed. Fair enough, but Renate Kuhl says people often say, fine, just not here. She's not sure a law will help.
I still monitor the kids, decide what's socially acceptable. Are the children too loud, too wild? I don't always feel welcome when I'm with the children.
Kids over 14 aren't covered by the current change in law. And zoning laws are also unchanged. Permits to construct childcare centres are rarely granted in residential areas.
OK, Armin Maiwald, what do you say to that report? When you see that report, what conclusions do you draw?
I don't think Germany is a particularly child-friendly society.
I thought you were going to say that, yeah?
But the
politicians are always saying, well, we're doing this and that. But when it comes right down to getting things done, like fixing up a playground, there's never enough money. I think it's ridiculous that we have to make a law that specifically allows kids to make noise. That's part of being a kid.
I have to agree with you there. People outside Germany watching this programme and hearing that there is a law of this kind will find it's a change to the law rather than new law, but nevertheless, it's a very strange business.
Yeah. You could put it that way. Kids are supposed to run around and make noise. When I remember the way we used to storm around yelling and screaming, I'd say that kids today are downright harmless by comparison.
Would you say that there was more tolerance back then?
Possibly.
Because it was a strict world. People were very strict when you were a youngster.
On the one hand, of course, we were more disciplined. That's the way we were raised. Maybe that's why. On the other hand, we were allowed to run and play soccer in the rubble and all that. And nobody complained about it. Maybe it has to do with the fact that our society as a whole has grown older. There are fewer children these days. And older people today simply don't have the strong nerves that our parents did. They started families at a younger age than today. Maybe that's one of the reasons. I really have no idea. But a society that needs a law saying that it's okay for kids to make noise, well, that's really something.
OK, we'll agree on that. But I said in the introduction to that report that I've brought up two children here in Germany. They were both born here in Berlin, and they've grown up in Germany. Yeah, and that's why I said at the beginning that my experience, doesn't tell me that Germany, for me, Germany has been a child-friendly society. And you're saying it's not. I'd like you to give me one or two other reasons why not.
I don't know what the situation in England is like, whether the comparison you make with Germany is actually the case, that you consider Germany a country that's child-friendly. There aren't enough nursery schools or daycare facilities here. In England, I believe they have all-day schools.
This is true. It's a good thing too, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We haven't got so many of those, and that means not all parents are able to work or otherwise pursue their careers.
Arbeiten können oder irgendwas ihrem Beruf nachgehen können.
That's been an ongoing problem here in Germany. Yeah.
Das läuft nicht und
it doesn't work.
Insofern,
and that's why Germany is not a child-friendly country.
Kinderfeindliches Land.
There's no effort to improve the situation even a little. They keep saying things are going to get better. But as with any kind of legislation, it takes a long time for anything to happen. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, we'll be able to stop talking about this because the situation will actually have improved. It's possible.
Okay, you've made some very important points. Let's talk about children in general, because you are something of an expert for children, and you're certainly an expert for children and children's TV. I know it's something you've got strong views about. Yeah, let's just begin with this. People these days say that children watch too much, or they're on the internet, they're on the computers too often. They watch too much TV, and it's a problem. People say, is it a problem? Do they watch too much TV?
I think so, and here's why. A lot of parents simply set their kids down in front of the TV or the computer. And they use these things as a sort of electronic grandparent, so they can have some time to themselves. I don't think that's good for the kids, because spending time with your children is part of the process of raising them properly. And I just don't like the idea of parking the kids somewhere so you can have some peace and quiet. Most important of all, the parents have no idea what the kids are going to find on the internet. Kids are very smart, and they're curious, so they'll try just about anything. You have no control over whether they're going to end up at a pornographic website or a site about warfare or some other stupid site. The parents can't keep track of what sites their kid visited or what they found there. And in my opinion, children under the age of 3 have no business watching TV or playing with the computer at all. But a lot of parents let them do it anyway, and I think that's dangerous, and I'd never allow it.
Okie dokie. Interesting points that you're making there. We're running out of time a little bit, and we're going to now move on to our traditional Talking Germany quiz at the end of the programme. And the first question touches on exactly what you've just been saying, and it is this. Does TV make children more creative, or does it corrupt them?
It depends on what you actually end up watching. If you're very specific about what shows you're going to watch, then you can actually learn something from the content. But if you're just going to sit there and watch whatever comes on, it's just ridiculous.
That was the final word there from Armin Maiwald. He's been a great guest on this show. I must explain to you that over the years he's explained many things to me, not just my kids. It's been great having him on the show. If you've enjoyed his company as much as I have, then do come back next week. Until then, bye-bye and tschüss.